Hello, Deborah.
Hi.
It's really nice to see you. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat with me today about speaking and listening. I met you when you were the head of the ACLU in New Jersey. Then you went on to the Ms. Foundation, and I'd love you to describe your current job right now so that I'm not getting anything wrong.
Right. So currently I am director of the King County Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, and we are an independent government agency that does its best to oversee the King County Sheriff's Office, which has about 800 officers. And we conduct that work doing a variety of activities, and we can't actually, like most oversight entities, we can't make the police do anything. So does present lots of challenges with respect to speaking and listening, because ultimately we have to get along.
Would I be correct in categorizing the job in some ways as a liaison between the sheriff and the community, the sheriff's office and the community?
I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it, and I might steal that and start using it. I think in an ideal world, that is a little bit a liaison or a translator, maybe sometimes. But we also have a variety of very technical tasks where we're overseeing their work in specific ways. Like we look at all their internal investigations to make sure they were done in a thorough and objective manner. For example, we can, conduct systemic audits and reviews of different aspects of their practices. So yes, that is one aspect of it for sure, and probably the most challenging.
Can you unpack this idea of being a translator a little bit more, especially because it's a communications term, and what that means to how you have to listen and how you have to summarize what people are saying, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I not quite as literal as that, but I think that as I have worked, I'm almost 3 years in this job, and I've worked with police a lot in the past, but you learn more about how they think and how they approach things, and I think that helps in being able to present their ideas to the public and talk about them. At the core, everyone has to recognize that each person, whether a police officer, an activist, or someone who runs afoul of the law, every one of them is a human being trying to get it right based on what they know. And unfortunately, since we live in, segregated societies, not just on race, but economics and so many other aspects, that we don't know each other as well as we should. And I think for me, getting to know more law enforcement professionals, I hate to do a broad brush up as a whole, because they're as diverse as any other profession or population as well, politically and otherwise. Let me correct that. They are not racially diverse, at least where we work, but there are lots of good reasons for that. And, but in terms of thoughts and ideas and what kind of people they are, you get the full spectrum.
When I came to you and said I wanted to speak with you about speaking and listening, what came to mind?
First, I thought, oh, well, I'm probably not very qualified to talk about that, but that never stops me. So why don't I go ahead anyway? The main thing. Probably second thing is just, oh yeah, listening. Listening is very important. You have to always keep up on your listening. Some people err on the side of, maybe dominating too much verbally, and some people don't take up the space they should take up. So you always have to, based on what your tendencies are, try to hit that happy medium and be able to shift ideally. And I definitely can do that, where I really sit back. Mostly it's not because, oh, now's a great time for me to listen. It's more like, ugh, I don't feel like talking right now, so I'm just going to listen.
In what ways do you make a conscious effort to listen better?
So a couple contexts. One is definitely in the workplace. I'm a Gen X working with a lot of millennials. And so I am really trying to pick up on their styles, which I don't want to generalize too much, but I have noticed a lot of differences having worked with a lot of people my age and now working with younger people. Also, our work is confusing and complex. So definitely something I'm very consciously working on now is slowing it down. I bought a poster with a turtle for my office that says slow down because it's just too error prone. And unlike the ACLU, actually nothing happens fast in my world. So there's no reason to get too ahead of yourself, because you really do have the time, because so much of what we do is in a review capacity. It's just after the fact. And so if a shooting takes place, we're just going to sit and wait and observe and monitor before we weigh in on it. So that's months, if not years, actually, because of how long it takes to investigate things and other things. Hopefully it will be more months than years in the future. But so in the workplace, that's a big deal because of, some of the work style differences in the office, and also the complexity of the work itself, and the fact that the work can be frustrating. Everybody's can, but we really were like a paper tiger. So you have to really think of all the tools in your toolbox. And similarly, I try to exercise those skills in interacting with law enforcement. But that's actually more for me trying to just listen for openings and common ground than listen to understand them, because I think I actually do understand them pretty well, perhaps better than they understand themselves at times. In my personal life, I feel like right now we're in this era, we're in a time of all kinds of distractions, and that it's really important to make time with your loved ones and your family to be distraction free and very present together. And so that's something I'm also trying to be more conscious about, and just simple choices like eating at the table and not in front of the TV that I know every family has to make, and things like that. So I think, I think in the world, we're in a tough spot, and in this country in particular, and that it's a time for heightened intentionality around being present. And being present to me means being able to listen.
I love what you said about listening for openings and common ground, that you already have understanding before that, so you listen for openings and common ground. Can you give me an example of a time where you were surprised by what you learned, or there was a breakthrough because you got to that sense of common ground?
So in the professional sense, it could even be something about an opinion on a police tactic, for example. And if I hear them say something that I know I can support, or something they need that we agree with they should have as a tool in their job for everybody to keep safer, then I'm going to, look, how can I try to agree with that or support it or help realize it for them, because that is like currency and, in the success of my job. Overall, I think the public and the police agree on more than they don't agree on. And if they would just implement everything that there's agreement on, we don't even have to talk about what we don't agree with for a long time. But the bigger aha moments have come from repeat communications, bashing you over the head kind of communications. And I would say for that, what first comes to mind is things around race and learning about one's own privilege. You grow up and you have your experience, and you only know what you know until you see something else or hear something else. And I do think we have a capacity, a high capacity to ignore what we see that we don't want to know about. And one thing I've noticed along my conversations with people of color friends is how frustrating it is that white people have these aha moments that where everything's so obvious, you know, but until that light kind of goes on, it's like when you there's thousands of ants crawling around, and but they're hard to see, but then you see one, and then you see them everywhere and realize how they're all around and just hard to see. So you know, I think there's kind of two types of communication that have impacted me along those lines. Some of them would be like direct one-on-one verbal conversations where people have cared enough about me to share hard truths with me. Because if a African American person takes the time to educate a white person, believe me, it's not how they want to spend their time. They are sharing something that they only have so much to give of, and they've chosen to give it to you, and you damn better listen, because that's an opportunity not everybody gets. So there's been that, including with my relationship with my husband, but also many women friends as well, you know, learning about how white feminism left Black women behind, and not in nuanced way and straight up in your face F you kind of ways as well. So those verbal communications are precious gifts. I've also gotten precious gifts through nonverbal communication, which is more like what I just call outcomes, where how I showed up or how I engaged in something didn't result in the type of outcomes I was hoping for or looking for or intending. So that's a case where you have to really look at yourself. And for me, the example that comes up is I landed in St. Louis a few months after Michael Brown was shot, and I got involved in that movement for a couple years. And I had just come out of having executive positions with the ACLU and the Ms. Foundation, and I knew how to show up in a certain way based on those experiences. But now I was like a middle-aged white woman in a young Black movement, and I had to figure out how to show up differently and how to add value as an ally or a co-conspirator, and just not take up space, and, you know, let go of those things and apply myself in different ways. And some of it was definitely painful, you know. Anyone who says they're woke better be woke enough to know they're still sleepy, you know? And so I take it that I'm always still sleepy and always still learning. But so sometimes valuable communication and listening can come through rejection or disapproval or other types of just negative outcomes that you weren't trying to achieve. And you just got to embrace them and learn as opportunities, especially when you're a white person who actually has the privilege to engage and know and have a diverse community to learn from, which most don't because of our segregation that I mentioned earlier. I think we're in a very strange time in this country right now, where on one hand, things are being heard in loud and clear new ways. Classic example would be the Me Too movement. But I also think of trans people's rights and how rapidly there's been increased understanding on that issue, and truth is being told even by, you know, small children who have these feelings. And so on one hand, there's been some really big breakthroughs in the, you know, last, let's say, 5 to 10 years, but with Me Too, obviously just the last couple of years. On the other hand, we are in a state where the concept of truth has been utterly perverted by our top leader and everybody around him. And it's hard to be heard when truth itself is under attack. And I'm not sure what to do with that, because even if I have the courage to share a truth, it's so vulnerable that I think people are going to keep more of themselves in, especially things that are vulnerable things, and vulnerable things are important things because, you know, like Mr. Rogers, I think, said, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. So it's a very strange dichotomy on that front. So as far as on an individual level, I am often able to make myself heard, although I'm not sure I'm as able to make myself understood. And it's interesting now, having moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, that I have definitely struggled to adapt a communication style that people here are more comfortable with, and therefore can hear what I'm trying to say. They're not comfortable with directness. You know, they're passive in terms of dealing with confrontation or something, some tension that needs to be addressed. And it's like the opposite of my personal style. And even though I'm actually from here, when I lived here before, I didn't notice it as much as having gone east and come back. So I'm always trying to think unsuccessfully of how to tamp my communications down. And, you know, I'm not willing to be inauthentic. That's a deal breaker for me. But I know I could work on, you know, just softening, reframing, going slower, you know, all the things that are kind of like struggles for on the receiving end for the Pacific Northwest folks. So that's a work in progress.
Deborah, thank you for your honesty. You're incredibly reflective, and it's not something, or that can be difficult. It could simply be difficult for leaders to find the time to be that reflective. Do you have an actual reflection practice?
No, I mean, you could credit it to self-absorption. Mostly, mostly, you know, I think I'm trying to be effective. I'm trying to use my time well, or the time during which I'm productive well. And so I'm not doing myself any favors if I can't make adjustments to my communication practices. But I'll tell you, it's hard. It's very much, you know, inherent and intrinsic to my personality and who I am. And just like most of us, it's like what people like most about me and like least about me, right? So you know, well, I'll tell you, there was a speech at Frank that I believe you saw. What's your superpower, right? And I don't even remember who the speaker was, but talking about really figuring out what your superpowers are and using them. But like all superheroes, sometimes they, you know, use too much of the power, too little of the power, you know. So it's, my husband said in the military, they train you to know your equipment, And I think we got to know our superpowers and be able to utilize them as effectively as possible.
I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the artwork behind you. Could you please tell me the story about that beautiful painting?
So that was painted by one of my college friends. It is a self-portrait she painted for herself. And it's a nude. Her name's Deborah Weinstein. She lives in St. Louis and now has 2 teenage daughters, you know, getting ready for college themselves, which I'm always amazed how my friends' kids are all grown up basically now, and I'm still too immature to have a kid. So, but I've been carrying that around for 20, 30 years, and I thought about not bringing it this time because it's a big piece, but here it is, naked Deb sitting in my house.